In case you haven't heard about Tech Impact, we are a 501c3 charitable organization based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with offices scattered across the country. We work specifically with nonprofits to help them with IT-related things, anywhere from data management to managed services to social media, digital marketing. Today I have on the line Liam, and I'll let Liam introduce himself in a minute. And I just have a few quick things to go over to make sure everybody has a great experience today. So everybody should have access to audio as well as Liam shared content. If you don't, please use the chat tab to communicate with me if you're having any problems throughout the presentation today. All attendee lines will be muted throughout the presentation. So Liam, I'll let you get started, and I'll be here just in case anybody has any technical difficulties. I'll also be monitoring questions and getting them over to Liam to make sure we have everybody's questions answered.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. Welcome to everybody who's attending today. This is the fifth in our series about online website marketing. And we've got a topic that's critically important, but certainly from the feedback that I get from a lot of audiences is that as an abstract topic, it's a little bit boring. Security is one of those things that we need to do, we need to know about, but battening down the hatches and keeping everything safe and keeping everything orderly isn't all that entertaining a topic. So what I aim to do today is go through the talk in about 40 minutes, maybe a little bit longer, but to leave time for your specific questions so that we can try to personalize it a little bit more and maybe give some insight into your specific situation so we can make it a little bit more engaging. As Sarah mentioned, if you do have any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box. I'll be trying to keep an eye on that, and I will, I'm sure Sarah will as well, and will pipe up if I ignore anything for too long. So let's get started, and there we go. So let's talk a little bit about you and who I expect to be on the call today. Obviously, I can't see you all. I know there's a great crowd out there because I can see the attendance list. But I'm expecting that you're the director of a nonprofit or charity, or maybe you work for a charity, and you do have some sort of role in online marketing for your organization, and you're really eager to deepen your understanding of online marketing, really with an aim towards increasing your effectiveness. We've all seen the value of the internet, the value of online marketing, and you're now trying to make sure that your charity takes better advantage of the tools it has available to itself. So me, as Sarah said, my name's Liam. My last name's Dempsey. I'm the owner of a very small consultancy called LB Design. We've been doing work since 2000, and we work with nonprofits and businesses in the US and the UK, and even a little bit in Central Africa. And for the purposes of this conversation today, really the relevant point is we've been making websites since 2001. So even before WordPress came about, we were making websites. And part of making websites is to help keep them secure and hack-free. And that's what we're going to talk about today, really how to make sure that your websites stay safe. So we've got a couple of things that we're going to go through today. One is some stats about WordPress and security. And that'll help give us a little bit of context around why security, particularly with WordPress websites, is so important. We'll talk about some security tips for website managers. And this is really meant, this talk is meant for people who are not overly involved in design and development, not necessarily highly skilled in web development or overly technical. It's really for people who might log in to create a blog post or update a bio or add a flyer to a website. It's really not intended to be overly technical. Certainly, if you have more technical questions as we get towards the end of the presentation, you should ask them. But that's not really where this presentation is heading today. Again, give you some recommendations for good plugins and services to help keep your website clear. So what we can't cover today, given the nature of a webinar and the size of the group on the call today, and the fact that we're all over the country and perhaps even beyond, we can't really get into too many specifics about how to secure a website for any single organization. There's a lot of different ways to do so, and a lot will depend on your specific configuration as it is right now. So we won't really be able to get into addressing any one single website, nor will we get into how to actually configure any of these security plugins, tools, or services, again, just because there's not time for that. But certainly we'll flag up the important ones to think about and be aware of. So everybody ready? Here we go. So we've talked about WordPress for the past 5 presentations now, and we all, I think, can agree that WordPress is a hugely popular content management system. And here are just a few really amazing numbers around it. It powers approximately 25% of the top 1 million websites. So of the 1 million most visited websites in the world, a quarter of those run on WordPress. And then you take that number and look at it with respect to the next bullet point, and not just 25% of the top 1 million, but approximately 75 million websites the world over are running WordPress. That's a lot of WordPress websites. And interestingly, 22% of all new domains registered in the US launch with a WordPress website. So when someone registers a new domain name, something.com or .org maybe, for a nonprofit, they'll use that domain to launch a WordPress-driven website. So you can see that WordPress really is a hugely powerful and immensely popular content management system. And what that means in a negative aspect is if you're a hacker and you're going to go to the trouble of hacking one website, you might as well try to hack a million. And just like historically from a computer virus standpoint, setting aside websites for a minute, most of the viruses were always around the PC or the Windows platform, simply because they sold more computers. There were more Windows computers in people's homes and offices than there were Macs. And therefore, if you're a hacker and you're going to hack a computer, you might as well hack millions. Same thing as with WordPress. Same thing with websites. You're going to hack a very popular system. And the question then becomes, is how do we stay safe? And the simplest answer, right out of the box, the most overarching answer, is just to keep WordPress up to date. WordPress is, in itself, inherently secure. But I think as we've seen in recent news over the last few years, no websites are safe, whether it's the FBI or the United States federal government in some other branch, or you're a leading academic institution, whatever the case may be. If hackers want to find a way in, they're going to spend enough time and energy to do so. While nothing is perfect, WordPress is very secure, but it needs to be kept up to date. It is software, and unlike the software that runs on your computer, which updates automatically, software on websites doesn't work the same way. It's not configured to do that. So you need to go in and make sure that the updates are done. Now, it doesn't mean you need to manually be transferring all sorts of files one by one and to be reading code, but you do need to make sure that the WordPress software running your website is kept up to date. And happily enough, the people who write WordPress, it's open source software, and there's a community of people that dedicate their time and resources to making sure that WordPress is improved and made better through updates. WordPress now will automatically update itself to some extent, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we do any updates ourselves, we have to make sure that we take a backup of our website, because just websites, WordPress is human-made, it's running on a human-made machine, a web server, things can happen, things can go wrong. And so we want to make sure that before we do any updates, we take a backup. And we'll talk again about backups in a bit. And I said that some of the updates are automatic now, and if we look at the last bullet point in here, where I have an example where it has version 4.3 asterisk. And that asterisk, if it were a real WordPress update, would be a number, 4.3.1, 4.3.2.3, etc. And when it's after that second decimal point, it will always be a security patch or a bug fix. It won't be a major functionality change. It will be addressing some issue in the current version. So 4.3 and then 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, etc. are just fixes to that version. So by and large, you can safely update any version of WordPress to as long as it has those 2 decimal points. So if you're currently running 4.3.2, then you can update to 4.3.3 without any issues likely to happen to it won't break your website. The other thing to keep in mind is even within the WordPress admin side, so if you're your website administrator, you're logging in and you're seeing that it needs to be updated, you can read the update notice and it will give you a list of the things that are to be fixed. And sometimes that list is a bit technical and it can be a bit difficult to understand. But by and large, those lists are pretty simple, and they'll talk about bug fixes or dealing with issues with this problem or that problem, or this ran into a JavaScript issue under these conditions, and this update addresses that. So is everybody with me so far? I'm not going too quickly? Okay, great. Let's keep going. So just like WordPress itself, the software itself needs to be updated. Plugins are absolutely the same way. And in fact, since I've been using WordPress in 2007, started using it in 2007, one of the things that we find, and this is industry-wide, not just my own findings or my team's finding, is that out-of-date plugins and out-of-date themes are the biggest security risk to your website. So if you've purchased a theme or you're using a free publicly available theme and there is a security patch to that theme, you need to make it. Because if you're running it, you can bet that thousands of other people and perhaps even millions of other people are running that theme. And it's the same thing with the plugins. The plugins really are just additional pieces of software that quite literally plug into WordPress, so they offer some expanded functionality. And again, they're written by human beings, and sometimes human beings make mistakes or technology changes, or someone discovers a possible security flaw in that software or a way to breach the security of that plugin. And rather, the plugin creator will then write a patch, and we have to update that. And that's what this window over here is. You'll see this notice when you check on your plugins that all of these various plugins here, Kismet, Events Calendar, and Yoast SEO, need to be updated. So we got to make sure that our plugins are kept up to date, as well as our themes. I mentioned this in a previous slide, but here's a bullet point about it, is that when we have an update that's available, you can see over here in the image here with the Kismet, just in the blue text, view version 3.1.3 details. So if we were to click on that, this is just an image so we can't, if we were to click on that, we would see the details of the updates that are to be made in this latest version. And we could assess whether or not we wanted to make those right away or whether or not we needed to check with our technical team or our web development team to see if it was safe to do so. When I say that we need to make updates, depending on the nature of those updates, I don't necessarily mean that they have to be made instantly right away. Don't let anything happen until you make that update. By and large, they should be done as soon as is reasonable. So if you are concerned about what the update is, get in touch with your technical team, your web development team, or maybe even your web host, depending on your configuration, and find out if it's safe to do so. And just as we saw with WordPress itself, plugins are exactly the same way with respect to that, the update being a security patch or a bug fix. If it's something dot something dot something else, so 1.9.1, 1.9.2, etc. It's going to be a security patch or a bug fix, and we can rest reasonably well assured that updating that plugin won't have any negative effects and won't break anything on our website. The plugin should still work the way it had been working, and will continue to do so while having addressed that security issue, that bug fix. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit of user type information, how we can keep our websites, WordPress websites, safe from a user perspective. And one of the first ones is to make sure that we don't use admin as a username. Historically, WordPress came with a user installed of admin. Now, it doesn't do that anymore. It hasn't been that way in a number of WordPress releases. But if your website's been around for a period of time, it may still be using admin. And you want to make sure that you change that or delete that. You can't change a username. You have to add a new one and then transfer the content from the admin to that new user. And the reason we don't want to have admin is for a hacker to force their way into your site via the login functionality. They have to guess your username and your password. And because historically WordPress was coming with the username of admin, that was one thing they didn't have to guess. All they had to guess was a password. So by keeping admin as a username, we basically give half the game away to the hackers right out of the box. So we really want to make sure that we delete any instances of admin. And we want to limit up the users who have access to the website. By and large, most organizations run websites that are brochures. And by that, I mean there's not a lot of interactivity between subscribers or people visiting the website and the website itself. They click on the About page, they click on the Staff page, they'll read the Programs page, they'll watch a video in the blog section, etc. They might even make a donation. But there's not a lot of logging in for most websites. So the people that we give access to, we really only want to do that in a way that is required. And what I mean by that from a website management standpoint is to be a bit silly about it. Just because somebody joins your charity doesn't mean they should have the right to access and edit content on the website. It should only be the people within the organization whose job it is to update the website. So depending on the size of your charity, the CEO may or may not have direct permission to access the website. And I mean that they have a username and a login. Obviously, if the CEO wants to edit content on the website, the very nature of her position will dictate that she's going to be able to make sure that it gets changed. But from a technical standpoint, from a website management standpoint, it's better to make the CEO go through whichever employee or staff member has the username and password to log into the website, rather than making sure that, well, just because the CEO is the boss of the organization, she should be able to actually log in and change things. So yes, the CEO may be able to log into the website, but that really depends on the size of the organization. If you're a two-person organization, then of course the CEO is going to log in and change things. If you're 15 or 20 or bigger, then maybe the CEO doesn't have administrative rights to the website. And we also want to get rid of users who aren't there anymore. So if somebody leaves the organization, even under great circumstances, we want to make sure that we remove them from having permissions on the website. And it's not a personal thing. They're not going to be offended. But we just want to either delete their user or remove their user from permissions, depending on what our approach is. But we want to make sure that that individual, especially after they've gone from the organization, can't log in anymore. And it could also be the case where somebody might be in charge of website administration and then their role changes within our charity. They no longer are in charge of marketing. They are now heading up the programs that we deliver for our communities. So they should have their permissions removed from the website. And it's just best practice, letting people in who need to be there and keeping out people who shouldn't be there. Nothing personal. It's not saying that they're not trustworthy anymore. It's really just about making sure that our website is as safe as possible. We also want to talk a little bit about permissions. As you can see in this graphic here on the right side of the screen, WordPress allows for different permission levels. And by that I mean within a website environment, when somebody logs into the website, they have the permission or the authority to do different things. And as you can see, this is a list from an e-commerce website. So we have Shop Manager, Customer, Contributor. And they have different roles and rights within it. An administrator can do absolutely everything on the website in terms of add pages, delete pages, add posts, delete pages, upload images, add menus, change any kind of settings that they want. And then the permissions degrade as you go down the list. Editors have fewer authorities, authors have fewer than the editor, contributor has less than that, etc. So depending on the size of our organization, we really only want to allow the required level of authority. So if we want some of our staff members to write blog posts, but we don't want them to be able to edit the about pages, or we don't want them to be able to edit the program pages, mostly just not that we don't trust them, but we just want to follow best practices and only give people permission, what they need to, permission to do things, only what their job entitles them to do or their responsibilities are. So we want to make sure that we follow those levels of authority and only give them out where they are needed. Okay, backups. This is really, really, really important. I can't emphasize this enough. We talked about it earlier in this conversation that any website, if it's online, it can be hacked. It doesn't make a difference how safe it is. We can do things to protect ourselves. I don't mean that it's a hopeless situation and we shouldn't even try, but if it's online, it can be hacked. And therefore, if we're going to run that risk, which we're going to be if we have a website online, then we want to make sure we have regular backups. We want to back up our database. WordPress is a content management system that requires a database, and the database itself can get hacked. It's not just the files on the server and in our theme or our images, it's also the database itself. We want to make sure that we back up that database, we back up our WordPress theme, we back up the uploads. Uploads are images and PDFs that we add to our site. The images can be for a blog post or even just part of the theme itself. And we want to back up our plugins. And the reason we back up our plugins is sometimes plugins will be specific for our website. So not every plugin, but maybe your developer or your development team has a plugin for a custom post type that isn't publicly available or is not in the WordPress repository. It's really just something clean and nice and simple just for your website. So we want to make sure that gets backed up so that we have that in the event that the site becomes hacked. Or even if the site is crashed, if we have our website on a host and that hosting company goes out of business, if we don't have a backup of our website, we may or may not be able to get it back from the website. From the web host, excuse me, I'm talking over myself. If the web host goes out of business, we may lose our site. So we want to have a backup of it somewhere that we know we can get access to. And we want to back up regularly, depending on your needs. So what is regularly? Well, if you're an organization that writes a daily blog post, you're going to want to back up more regularly than if you write a monthly blog post because your content is changing more regularly. If you're an organization that's growing, you're adding new staff and you're adding new programs and you're serving different communities and you want to address those communities online via your website, you're going to need to back up more regularly than less regularly. So you might back up every day, you might back up once a week, you might back up once or twice a month. And it really depends on how often you're changing things. You don't need to back something up just because it's been a while. You want to back something up because there have been changes, mostly. Now that I say that, backing up just because time has passed is also a good idea to some extent, in that your website might not be hacked today, and even though you haven't changed anything this month, it might get hacked next month. So if you only back up once every 6 months, you'll have more of a likelihood that you will not have a clean backup. Does that make sense? Everybody follow me there? Okay, great. No questions coming in via the chat box. I'll keep going. So we talked about this. Last bullet point here is making sure that we send our backups to a different server or location. And what that is indicating is that we don't want our backups just to sit on the same server, the same computer where our website is. That's better than no backup at all, but if we can send it somewhere else, it'll make it safer. It's like if we have a hard copy file of a very important document and we leave it in our office, and the copy of that file is in the same filing cabinet as the original. If that gets stolen or the office burns down or there's a flood, we've lost both of them, so we might store one off-site. Same thing with our websites, and we can push them to a different server. There are services, and we'll talk about that later on. We can maybe send them to Dropbox or to other locations. And if our website's small enough, we can even email it to ourselves, depending on our email configurations. So what are some backup resources that are worth considering? So there are services that we can configure to back up our website remotely. And these are just two. There are definitely more. I'd recommend either one of these, WordPress or CodeGuard. They each have their own. These are paid service. You're not going to get a backup service. That is free. There are backup plugins, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you won't have a backup service that's free. So WordPress and CodeGuard, if you Google either of them, you'll find more information about it. I guess if I had to differentiate the two, I would say that WordPress is probably easier to use and configure. The CodeGuard is equally powerful in its own way. So that's a service, and there are likely to be monthly fees with that. And then an alternative is a plugin, a premium plugin. By premium, it just means that you pay for it versus a free plugin in the WordPress repository. Premium doesn't necessarily mean that it's hugely expensive. Backup Buddy is a very, very reliable backup and security plugin put out by a company called iThemes. And I can't remember the exact fee for that, and I apologize for that. We have, through LB Design, a developer's license, so we can use it on all of our websites that we use and work with for our clients. And I think it costs us maybe a couple $100. So a single site license is going to be significantly less than that. And before we start to scoff at paying a couple $100 for a plugin, I think it's important to keep in mind the time and energy that we put into making our website. And so we have to spend $200 to keep that website safe. That's probably a worthwhile investment, especially if it means that in the event that we do get hacked or the web server goes down completely, then we only have to spend a couple $100. Now that couple $100 is for the development license. It turns out, I do have a note here that says the Backup Buddy license is $80 for a year. So that's a inexpensive cost of insurance. There are free backup plugins in the WordPress repository. Backup WP Up. WP Up is a highly reliable and reputable plugin. And while I haven't used that plugin specifically, I heard good things about it, and the reviews about it are quite good. And basically, you would have to install that plugin on your WordPress website and then configure it. But depending on your knowledge and experience with WordPress, it should be a relatively straightforward task. Some higher-end web hosts actually provide daily backups as part of their services directly. And our preferred web host, WP Engine, does that. They run daily backups of everything. And in fact, we can log into our website and just with the click of a button, do a very quick and full comprehensive backup of the website. So those are different solutions, and they're all worthwhile, and it just kind of depends on your immediate situation and concerns. I want to spend just a minute talking about web hosting. And again, I don't want to go too technical here. I'll just leave it at this, is that one of the biggest factors of the security of your website, in addition to keeping your WordPress and plugins and themes up to date, is the configuration of your web host. And some web hosts have a better reputation for security. They put more emphasis on it. And I would thoroughly recommend that you investigate any prospective web host about its security practices. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail. I don't want to lose anybody on the technical side of things, but it's well worth it. And in recent years, there have been a growth of a number of different WordPress-specific web hosts. And so what that means is these web hosting companies provide website hosting services just for WordPress websites. And so they tailor their server settings around WordPress's strengths and weaknesses. I mean, they compensate for the weaknesses. They reduce the issues caused by any weaknesses that there may be and emphasize the strengths. So it's a really a great option there. And just kind of a note here is that cheap web hosting is very rarely the best, and I might even argue that it's very rarely worthwhile. We've seen web hosting that costs less than $5 a month, and often that's thrown in with email as well. And my approach to that is if you're only buying your web host 1 pint of beer a month, if you have any problems with it, they're not going to try to fix it or help you too much because they've already drank that beer. So it's worth paying more because, frankly, with hosting, you either pay up front or you tend to pay more later if your site is hacked. There are services, Sucuri is one of them, Sucuri, S-U-C-U-R-I. They're online and they do a great job of cleaning up hacks, but it's a couple of $100 to get them to clean your website, which isn't a huge amount of money to pay to have a website cleaned up. But if you were looking to save money by only spending $5 a month on web hosting and your site gets hacked in the 11th month and then you've got to pay the $200 to get it cleaned up, plus deal with any downtime while your site is hacked, you basically end up paying as much as or more than you would have paid had you gone with more expensive, more tailored, more customized hosting in the first place. Okay, so here's a couple of technical suggestions for you, and I really included these mostly as something that you can chat with your technical team about. This is not something that I would expect most people to do. So I'm going to go through them pretty quickly just in the interest of time, but they will definitely be available on my slides. My slides will be available on slideshare.net/Liam Dempsey after this presentation. slideshare.net/Liam Dempsey. About 5-10 minutes after this talk ends, it'll be online. And I'll put that out on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at the company's at LB Design, and I'm at Liam Dempsey. Okay, so we want to use secret keys, and what secret keys are, as you can see in the screenshot, is a way to make sure that the cookies on your WordPress site are kept as secure as possible. And cookies are what tells your website and your browser that you are logged into your WordPress website. So if you don't know what this means, that's okay. Just check to make sure that whoever built your website, whoever manages it, is using the secret keys. And it can be found in the wp-config file, And I'm not going to get too bogged down here. I'm just going to keep going. We want to set the right folder permissions for our website. And again, this is a technical thing about what the settings should be on the web server. And the chmod settings or change modification settings should be set for files to 644 and to folders for 755. There are some variations to that. It doesn't have to be exactly those. But if your web host requires that you set permissions to 777, you absolutely need to change web hosts, because 777 is guaranteed that your site will get hacked. It basically lets anybody do whatever they want to your folders. So hackers can basically use your website like it's their own private computer. We don't see that 777 issue as much as we previously have in recent years or in previous years. So it's not as much of an issue, but some of the less expensive hosts sometimes don't quite get their settings right. So you want to make sure that you're not being forced to set it to that 777. And when you are accessing your server, you want to make sure that you access it via SFTP and not just FTP. Again, it's a little bit of a technical thing. I won't get into all the reasons, but SFTP is more secure, and it encrypts the content that's being sent to your server, and it encrypts that connection. You just want to keep it that way. It's basically making it more difficult for people to hack what you're trying to do. So I'm going to ask everyone to raise their hand. Who's heard of password management software and who uses it? Okay, that's a little bit of a joke because obviously I can't see you if you've raised your hand. But hopefully everybody has seen or heard of password management software and is using it. The software is a fantastic way to make sure that the passwords and usernames that we're setting up all of our online accounts for are unique and encrypted. So what it allows us to do, instead of having one password that we use for our email and for our website and for our web host and our domain name and our banking and our grocery store and whatever else you may have, it allows us to use a unique password for each one. And we can use very advanced cryptic passwords, 16, 18, 20 characters long, with a mixture of numbers, of capital letters, lowercase letters, and symbols, that there's no way we're ever going to remember them, but our software does remember it and keeps it very, very encrypted. So when we go to our website, we can use our software to give us the username and password and log in. And then it allows us, because we're not having to remember everything, it allows us to keep separate passwords, often separate usernames with our different accounts. So if we use one username and password to log into our WordPress site, and let's say we use Backup Buddy to send backups of our website to a Dropbox account, we can have a separate username and password for Dropbox. And then if Dropbox gets hacked, and it's happened before, it's invariably going to happen again, and that's not an attack on Dropbox in any way, just the nature of the way things happen on the internet. We know that our website will be safe because we're not using the same username and password. So we can keep everything different. And maybe one of our employees, their email was hacked, but not because we're using different usernames, different passwords, our information is safe, our access is safe. That said, whenever a service is hacked, like Dropbox, we still want to make sure that we change our password to something cryptic, even if we haven't noticed anything dodgy or suspect in our own Dropbox account. We're not finding anything missing or suspicious looking files there. We still want to change it as a matter of best practice. So I recommend 1Password. It is expensive, it's $35, and then you have to buy separate licenses for your phone and maybe for your tablet. Their licenses change over time. As they grew as a company, their licensing processes changed. But it's fantastic, and it's very, very reliable. And I think all told, it was probably about $50 to roll out 1Password on my laptop, on my tablet, and on my phone. And if you think about it, $50 to keep your information safe and secure, and that's a flat fee, it's not a yearly license, is a pretty reasonable amount. And then you can use it across any sorts of devices. So even when I'm on my phone, I can use very cryptic passwords to log into my website and keep that safe. And the benefit of password software is that it can also be used for non-work related sites. So my personal email or my personal website or even my banking accounts that I want to log into, I can still use 1Password. So I can still get at that information from my phone, but I do so in a very, very secure way. Okay. So what are our key takeaways? We absolutely have to protect our website. It's a must. If we don't, it's just a matter of time before it gets hacked. And I can tell you that at LB Design, we deal with client hacks once or twice a quarter, maybe once or twice every 6 months at least. And it's invariably clients of ours who don't want to keep their site safe. So they don't do regular updates. They don't go with a reliable web host. They save money in the short term, and unfortunately, they end up paying for it in the long term. So you really do want to protect your site. It's not a, I think I should do this. It's, I absolutely have to do that. We've got to keep our WordPress plugins, software, and themes up to date. If we don't, our site's not going to be safe. We've got to take backup, backup, backup. And yes, I deliberately put it there 3 times. It's that important. We've talked about the plugins and the services that we can use. A lot of times, once the backup situation is properly configured, it will run by itself safely, and we just need to check on it now and again to make sure that it's working. But that initial configuration work is hugely important. We want to manage our users and permissions. Again, it's just a matter of best practice. It's not trying to offend people and kicking them out or not letting them do things that they previously had been. It's really just a matter of making sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our website safe. And we want to use password management software so that all of our accounts, wherever they may be and from wherever we access them, are as safe and secure as they can be. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I did say I was going to aim for about 40 minutes, and my timer is showing 39 minutes and 27 seconds, so I'm going to give myself a high five for that. But at this point, I'll welcome questions from you via the chat box, if you have any. And feel free to make them specific, because we do have some time.
Great, thanks, Liam. I don't see any questions coming in yet, but we'll stay on the line for a few more minutes just in case people are typing them now.
And if people have questions about WordPress or website security outside of the immediate bullet points that we talked about, I'm happy to answer those too. Again, we have a little bit of time here, so I'm happy to take questions that might be further afield.
Okay, I have a question from Susan. Are there any security issues with changing your web host but keeping your domain?
No, not in and of itself, no. The way that process would work is you would move your website onto your new web host, and once all the files and database are in place there, you would just update your domain name settings to point to the new web host. So that process in and of itself isn't particularly worrying from a security standpoint. The bigger issue is the new web host, are there security practices where they should be, and are your domain name access passwords, where you log into the website where you can access your domain name settings, is that secure? Because there certainly have been instances in the news where that account, that domain name registration account, gets hacked and somebody loses control of their domain name. And so aside from the difficulty of not having access to your domain name, somebody might redirect it. Hackers might push it to something that's not at all about your charity or your community. In fact, might be completely the opposite and contrary to what you're trying to achieve. Can be a real problem, and it can take days to get control of back of that, maybe even longer, depending on the domain name registration. So there's a question here about WordPress statistics, and currently WordPress, as I understand it, does have the largest market share as a content management system. I don't think that there are any as big as it. It's a variety of WordPress.com sites. So a company called Automatic runs hosting services around WordPress sites, and those are available at WordPress.com. And then other companies like mine, like LB Design, will make websites with WordPress software, and then we put that software on any number of web hosts for charities like Tech Impact or any kind of organization, business or otherwise. Sarah, did I answer your website transition moving question adequately?
I believe so. I haven't seen any follow-up. Yes.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you. Okay, does anybody have any final questions? Liam, why don't you go ahead and share your email address to folks so they can contact you after if they have any specific questions. And I'll list mine as well. Feel free to contact me if you would like a recording of today's webinar. And we also have, like Liam mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, this is the 5th of a series. So we have the recording of 3 other ones, and we'll have all 5 docked up, and Liam's agency will be hosting them on their YouTube site. So we'll make sure to send out an email to everybody who attended at least one so they have access to that. So thank you so much. I look forward to hearing any follow-up you may have for us. Liam, thank you very much. Great job again. I'm going to mute my line in just a minute and keep the window open for a few more minutes just in case anybody has anything final they want to share. So thanks. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Goodbye now.